Hello, and welcome back to the Projector Stories Podcast. Laura and myself have been on a sabbatical, even though it's probably not the right word to use here. We've been on an extended hiatus because there was just a lot going on. Laura had family stuff going on, and we just wanted to give ourselves some time away, and we're back. And as you guys know, who have been here for a while, in this podcast, we basically just talk about what's been going on with us in live and living color. We'll probably either have a lot of ground to cover for this episode or nothing at all, because it's like all overwhelming to try and synthesize everything from the past month. But either way, we're gonna figure as we go. So yeah, welcome back. We're happy to be back. Hi, Laura.
Hi, it's crazy that it's been a month. It doesn't feel like it's been that long. It was like 2 weeks, but that's just
Well, when
life.
you're busy, time flies.
Yes, though we have had the 2034 transit last week, so part of the busyness was just everyone was busy, but part of it was just life accumulating and concentrating itself into a little hodgepodge of chaos. So
Yeah,
I'm glad
yeah.
it's starting sort of to dissipate. It's still busy. It's still busy. It's a lot. I don't know how humans human. They really don't. They're sacral. That's how they do it. They have sacral capacity.
A mystery. um, so do you want to kick us off? Do you want to say anything? Do you want me to? How do you wanna begin?
Well, I have a list of things I want to go over, so I have some sort of framework of things I want to talk about. I don't know if there's anything pressing that you want to talk about too for you. I'll just
Well, no, let me just say that you said last week was the welcome to Gemini season. Last week was the 3420. We had that transit, and now we're actually in what is almost Laura's opposite birthday kind of like flavor, because we're in the 1648. Is that right?
no,
Or
69.
16. Sorry,
But
sorry.
48
Um,
is defined with the nodes, so we all have 1648
okay,
defined.
brain. I need to get my brain back to firing normally. But just wanted to kind of preface that with like a happy half birthday.
Well, my dad is this, I guess, is where we'll start off. My dad is a 16951, so like his birthday is exactly the opposite of mine. So I don't get to celebrate my half birthday. Well, I sort of do. Like I pretend internally we're celebrating his birthday, but inside I'm like, hey, it's my half birthday, and like no one cares. But to talk about my dad, also 6447, also a 169. Well, I'm a 916, but he's a 169, cross of identification 51. Very logical person. He recently, like he's a biochemist. When I was little and I had to like go to school, tell my to the class, like, what do your parents do for work? I don't remember if it was me thinking up this idea or my parents telling me to say this with their broken English, but I would say my dad makes drugs because he worked in pharma and would make drugs, medical drugs. But you go to school and you say that and people get the wrong impression. But yeah, my dad made drugs. Now he works the stock market to invest in different drugs. Um, and he potentially has defined solar plexus. I think he does based on, my entire life living with him and understanding his personality, but I don't know his birth time. He doesn't know his birth time, so it's also a possibility that he doesn't. But recently we were having dinner and my brother-in-law started talking about my dad investing in the stock market and how it was like a great fitting analogy for the emotional wave of how he will not be spontaneous. Like if something crashes, if something like drops low, if there's an emotional wave dropping, he's not going to act irrationally and just sell everything. Like he's going to wait it out because he understands the logical patterns that things naturally go up and down. And there is a reason for the thing to drop because he's doing the investigative research as a one. He understands why things are dropping from like studying and investigating into the medical industry to know like what these companies, because it's like his major um, portfolio of what he invests in is biochemistry, not biochemistry, but like pharma, which is funny because I'm like anti-drugs, not anti-drug drugs, but anti-medical drugs for the most part. I like plants, so it's just funny. But um, he will research and investigate into these companies to look at his opinion of whether their drugs will succeed or fail based on his extensive understanding because he has a PhD in biochemistry. And so he like is living his design basically in a nutshell. And it was just like really fun to like watch the fifth line praise happening of just like putting him on a pedestal, saying all these great things about him, of how he is logical and he understands patterns and he understands the emotional, well, the not the emotional wave, the stock market wave, to know that just because something goes up or down doesn't mean you have to do anything about it. You can wait it out. Now, in real life, when things happen, he is gonna be irrational and do things. But when it comes to the stock market, he waits out the wave, and it's great. And it was just fun to witness that. And like that was on my list, something I wanted to share. But to segue, well, Sarah, is there anything you want to say about that?
I think that's super, like, I love that for him. I'm just happy that I think he wouldn't have had success in it had he been any other way, you know? So he
Yeah,
probably would have been a non-starter. Like he would be doing something else
yeah,
had he been the type of person that's being like impulsive with the wave.
yeah.
So it's interesting.
Sort of related to this theme, I had a conversation recently about him. I don't know we were in a group. I think it was more than five of us, so it was like a penta, and like he and I were kind of the offshoot having a side conversation. And I don't remember how it started, but we started talking about gene therapy. And I think this is really interesting looking at human design and how human design like is the expression of our genes in a metaphysical way. But he was talking about a company investigating and doing experiments and producing drugs and healing modalities for gene therapy, which is gene replacement therapy, which is to say, like, they're chopping up the genome, taking out part of it, and replacing it with a different gene, and then hoping that that new genome will take and multiply in the body to change a person's genome, which is wild. Like I looked up the Human Genome Project and like I think it only happened like in the 1990s. I think it was after we were born, Sarah, that people even started the project of looking at the human genome. And for the most part, they all thought it was junk anyway, so didn't think a lot of the genome had any value. But I was just thinking about it in terms of individuality and mutation. Like this gene that they're doing is for deafness. And they put it into a 9-year-old girl. And after several months, like it took, and she is now hearing and she is no longer deaf. So they cut out the gene, the mutation. If you think about it, like everything that is happening in our body is like we have genetic mutations that have gone south or gone quote unquote wrong, veer from the structured homogenized path to have certain issues or mutations in the body that we perceive as issues, such as deafness or whatever genetic disorder you may or may not have, or someone else may or may not have. And so it's really interesting to think about like the roots, the metaphysical roots of these mutations kind of are situated in individual circuitry because that's where mutations happen. And I was thinking like maybe the core of like when these mutations happen, the person was either highly individualistic in their design and then passed on the mutated genes, or perhaps they were going through an individualistic transit, and so their non-individual body was exposed to the potential for mutation, took on the mutation, and then passed it on to, children, um, or their future offspring, what have you. And so it was really interesting to think about the scary side of gene therapy and how it can go down a dangerous route with people trying to manipulate the human genome. And what does that mean for our human design, for just the natural way we express ourselves, not necessarily in that physical genetic way of like having the deaf gene or not, but where does that show up in the body graph with the codons and all the expressions of the gates. But it was really interesting to converse with him about it and then to be able to share my knowledge of um, how I feel like maybe we've said this before here, I don't remember, but like when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother in the third trimester, in the fetus that became your mother, she developed the eggs, not the fully developed eggs, but she had the genetic material inside of her, the cells that would become the eggs that would become you or your siblings as she developed into a mature woman who was within her reproductive years. So like you as genetic material existed in your grandmother. And so we have this strong connection to our maternal line, which I was saying, like, why are we passing on last names from the father's side if we have such deep connections to the maternal side? But in terms of that, that genetic material is there. Whereas for men, like they're constantly producing sperm every day of their lives. That if they have a genetic mutation happen, that mutation could potentially affect the future development of sperm within their body. So I was thinking, like, I wonder how much these gene therapies can be passed on. Like, is it just, you're affecting one person, that's it, and it's going to stop there? Or can you correct genetics, like, for the long-term foreseeable future, for just like how people are going to continue to reproduce in the future? Is it something that can only be applied to men? Or not. I don't know, but it was very fun to have this conversation with him. And also like internally scary because it just reminds me of Hitler and the Holocaust and genocide for people wanting to control like what humans are and how they function and behaviors. And it goes into scary territory, but I thought it was fascinating. And especially in terms of just like how are we expressing ourselves in terms of our energetic genome, like our human design. It's connected to our genes. So it's just, yeah, interesting.
There's
Thoughts?
so many things there. Just to say that after listening to PHS, he goes into the fact that like two were affected by the transits that are happening as we're developing, like from the moment that the egg meets the sperm. And so like the mutations that may happen to us before our physical bodies, right? Because we're talking about the design side here, really. um the mutations that happen to us like can be largely based on transits as well. So it's like beyond even just the father and the mother, like looking at the transits that were happening when the fetus was being basically the structure of the baby, the body was being built internally. And then it's interesting too that we're talking about genomes. This is so like perfect for like all of the planets going into Gemini this week too, because Venus is going to Gemini and Jupiter is going to Gemini, and Gemini is like such a like between Jupiter and Mercury, because Gemini is a mercurial sign. It's like such a expansive conversation to be having about like science and like where things are potentially going. I've been listening to this book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, who is a doctor. He has a PhD, he was a medical doctor, but he's worked in like many different fields. And he was talking about how, and it's just funny because The Myth of Normal is like one of those books that essentially, without needing to, is like making an argument for human design, which I love. That and another book that I'm reading, but one of the things that he says is that at the end of jeans, kind of like at the end of shoelaces, there's these little like caps called telomeres. Laura, I don't know if you talked about this too, but and they are affected by adverse experiences in childhood. And so you can actually tell like the kind of longevity and like the health of a person in a generalized way, not necessarily specifically, based on these telomeres, because they degrade the longer, the more kind of negative experiences one has in the environment, and they're a part of genes, although they're a part of genes in the sense that all genes have them, no matter who you are, where you are, like all of your genes have these little like caps on the ends of them that degrade over time, but then they also degrade based on environmental factors, what's going on with you while you are being raised. And a lot of what his argument is that genes are actually not as important, not as relevant as we think they are, because a lot of times we conflate the things that are genetic with the fact that like we've passed down as well nurturing behavior, like we nurture the way that we were nurtured in a sense. And so it's hard to like pull the generational trauma, if you will, out of the equation, right? We can't just look at them in a vacuum in a sense unless we were able to really look at them in a vacuum. And of course, like Laura was saying, with the ear, like the hearing genes, or the genes that are related to deafness and hearing, like of course there's like again this quality of like our genes are affected by like the transits that are going on around us, and like we may have a predisposition towards deafness, but just because our parents are deaf doesn't mean that we're going to be deaf. Like there's all of these other factors that are playing into it simultaneously. And so like the question that I have, of course, it's like, okay, well, you fix the deafness, which is amazing, but then like what about all of the other stuff? And that stuff is stuff that like we haven't accounted for as a society as a whole yet. So it's like I think someone made a post about this at some point, but it's like, we can make somebody healthy, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to be themselves. Like they're still going to be transferring, or we're going to make somebody like, hearing when they're deaf, but like they're still in transference, they're still in not self. And so, there's so many like factors that play into it, that go into it, like when we're looking at it, not just from the, I guess, logical pattern perspective, but also from like the fact that we're all like all of the environmental things are constantly playing into how it is that the kind of inborn nature of us like actually expresses. So that's not really to ask a question. I don't know exactly what my point is either, but it's just, a fun kind of line of thought to have when it comes to genetics and what the potentiality is, and is it even worth it? Because, it's like you want to start playing around with this stuff, like have fun, but it doesn't mean that you're going to create some kind of superhuman. Like, like the human is still going to likely, maybe it won't have specific, congenital kinds of things, or it's able to be healed of them in a way, but it's like there's still all these other kind of factors that we have to look at simultaneously that makes it like we're just not in necessarily a great space to be playing God. Not that we believe in God exactly, but you know what I mean.
That's really interesting. Do you know, are these, I forgot the word, something with the letter T, are they separate from the stop codons? Like you have your stop codon and then you have this thing, or are they part of the stop codon?
I don't know. I would have to look into it. There was a huge study that was done. This woman who studied it won the Nobel Prize actually, because she was tracking like the telomeres and like watching like the outcomes for people based on, looking at what their telomeres looked like and then looking at what their outcomes looked like. And so there were like these kind of signifiers that she could tell, like especially that were the most obvious for people who are like, who are like in any type of like other than Caucasian, like they had really like their telomeres aged in a way that was so much more drastically quick, I guess, than you could say than like others would. And so, there's a lot, of course, that goes into it, I'm sure. And I know that I'm botching it because, I read a chapter. I mean, I've read almost all of the book, but this was just one of the chapters of the book. And so it's something that I didn't really go in depth into, but it's something that's, we could definitely look at, and then maybe we'll tell everybody next week when we find out.
Or you could look it up yourself. That's really it's like the millennial thing, like you watch a 10-minute video and all of a sudden you're an expert in something. Which is how I identify with so many things in my life. Like you read a chapter, now you know all about it, but you really don't, but you want to talk about it as if you do. Um, it's super interesting.
Wait a second. Millennial thing. Google, thank you. Telomeres are structures made from DNA sequences and proteins found at the ends of chromosomes. They cap and protect the end of a chromosome like the end of a shoelace. In almost all animals, from the simplest to the most complex, telomeres are required for cell division. So it's all chromosomes.
So maybe it's not then the stop codon, or like within the stop codon. Because I was thinking about that, since if you don't know, if you're listening, the three stop codons are 56, 33, and 12.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so Sarah has all three of them. I have two out of three. I don't know what that
That is
means in terms. Sarah has to start codon too, but it means like it has this conclusive energy within human design for like you come to the end of a journey, you come to the end of a mutation with 12 that you want to converse to the other about. You come to the end of a experience with 56 and 33 that it gets situated like in the throat where you talk about again, it's like all in the throat. You talk about the end of your experiential or personally mutative experience. Um, and it comes out that way through the throat. But yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I want to dig in more. Um, I don't know if I will because you can't really pick and choose what your body is interested in investigating as a one-line
so
body. Um, Sort of related. Okay, if we're going to keep to the medical theme, Sarah, you sort of initiated me into the journey of studying about endocrinology further because you were talking about your adrenal glands in like the off time that we sparingly conversed with one another in the past month. It's been quiet. Like we talk so much to one another, but it's just been so busy that our side conversation is hardly a conversation at all. But Sarah told me about her adrenal glands and like, wait, I don't understand how they function. Therefore, I must understand how they function as my brain works. And so I've been studying deeper into metabolism and endocrinology. And part of that process of how DNA part I don't know, like there's so much like my brain hasn't sat with it. I feel like it could again the woes of having PRL DRL. You can listen to the same thing and watch the same thing over and over and over again, and like you can't retain it, or you can't I can't access it. I every time I listen to it, it's brand new. And it's not like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like, no, every time I re-listen to something, it's brand new. And I can't pull it out of myself, so I don't know what's gonna get pulled out of me here and out of the things I thought I learned that I probably actually really didn't learn. But I'm gonna try to remember like my point with why I wanted to bring this up. Homogenized health. I wanted to talk about homogenized health from the health standpoint compared to the human design standpoints. Like science and that logical circuit, very Gemini of me right now, but like the logical circuit has found like there is a standard for what the healthy body should be like. We have brains that are supposed to operate a certain way. We have reproductive organs that are supposed to operate a certain way. We have organs that are supposed to operate certain ways. And there is a standard for what those normal ranges of those parameters are of like how it should function. And learning about being a projector, we often hear that we have less energy, that we're more fatigued, that we fatigue more easily, all these things. And you can sort of overlay that onto the body and look at where does fatigue come from in the body? How does fatigue show up in the body? And why is it in the body? And or other things. And it's making me feel a way. I don't know how to describe that way, but feel a way about the labels that we have about projectors having less energy. Because from the health standpoint, like there should be a certain way that our endocrine and pancreatic glands function to metabolize and produce energy in the body. ATP, I was like learning about ATP. Everyone remembers from biology that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and that is the absolute only thing we ever remember from biology class, or at least that's been my experience. If people say remember something from biology, like the response is always the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Do you know what that means? No, of course not. But it was a catchphrase. So this has that been true for you, Sarah? Is that what you remember from biology class?
I
Just
mean,
to
I
check
don't
in.
really remember anything from biology class, but
Okay.
I had a really badass biology teacher, and I do remember that. Like, I do remember that. Like, but I wouldn't have said that I remembered that unless you said it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I needed to be reminded of it.
Yeah. But what does that mean? Right? Like we remember the catchphrase, sort of
Mhm.
sometimes, but what does it mean? It's like the mitochondria is responsible for producing ATP through something called the electron chain, transport chain. Like I've been looking into like weird pathology, biochemistry stuff that I probably have no business getting into. But I've been studying it. Like how does the body get energy? I constantly feel fatigued, which I mean, not constantly, for the most part, a lot of times I feel really fatigued. And there's the umbrella statements of like generators have energy, non-sacral people don't have energy. And I've just been trying to dig into how I can prove that wrong with science, with the logical circuit. So I've been sort of studying, right, endocrinology, ATP, how it's produced, what's necessary for it to be produced, ways in which we get energy, and it's been fascinating. I won't bore you with all the details. I like Ninja Nerd. I'll recommend him, Ninja Nerd on YouTube. He's been around for a while. He explains things in a very logical way that's easy for my brain to think it understands it, which in the moment it does. And then after the fact, it forgets everything that he ever said. The woes of a right brain with a right mind. But um, yeah, my point is with when I said this to myself in preparation, like the past couple weeks, when I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a great topic of conversation to bring up." There is a lot more stuff that was said in my head as it goes, and then when it comes to actually sharing it, it just feels like, those memes where like you have an artist that is unable to paint horses and like the rest of the painting of like lore like back in the day is like beautiful, and then like you look at the horse and it has like this hideous face that's like cartoonish because the artist doesn't know how to paint horses, and like the meme caption is like, oh yeah, I can paint a horse, and you look at it and it does not resemble a horse. That is my brain all the time, thinking it knows how to explain things, and then when it comes to actually explaining them, like it really doesn't know how to explain things. But sorry, side tangent, that was totally unnecessary. Homogenized health. I forgot what my point is. I'm gonna go back to my note app and see what I wrote about homogenized health and energy levels, hormones, gene therapy. I don't know. What did I want to
May
say?
I?
What?
May
Yeah, go
I?
for it.
I just wanted to say, like, just on homogenized health, it's so funny. Like, we're not, this is neutrino stream. We're not together. We're not talking. We're thinking about the same things though separately. And one thing that human design is, and this is what it's called, is the science of differentiation. But the thing that I've been kind of trying to like square the circle on is like we are a human organism. Like Laura's saying, we all have fucking mitochondria,
Yes.
and so it's like, okay, so where is the moments where we should follow certain levels of homogenization, right? Like there are things that the human body needs versus the moments where we need to veer into what's correct for us from the human design perspective. And on top of that, also it's like, when do we need to follow homogenized health when our bodies have been in transference and our minds, our personalities have been in transference so long that we're sick? And like, not like immediately that the prevailing wisdom on PHS works for us. Even, it's like, if you have cancer and it's like stage whatever, like far enough along, like you need to do chemo, like you can't eat yourself into like the right kind of state. And so this has been like where my mind is at too. It's like, what level of health is required for you to actually be able to access your PHS in a way that like promotes healing in a real way, versus what it's just kind of like you're doing stuff that is not affecting you because like there's a lot of damage that's been done. um Laura, did you get to your thought?
No, but I
Or
but I have a new thought in response to that. Is like, yeah, like so we tell projectors we're supposed to have less energy, and so our bodies are malfunctioning. We have issues, like things that need to be corrected. And yet within the human design community, we're told, oh, it's normal for you to have this issue. Therefore, there's nothing you need to do about it other than rest more. But like that's not addressing the actual issue with how your hormones are functioning and your deficiencies and whether you're getting the right minerals or metabolizing nutrients correctly. Like it's not actually addressing the core issue of like the standard body. Like you are a human body, like you said. You can't you can't not be a human body, and so the human body has certain ways in which it operates. And yeah, good point. Again, I don't I don't remember my
no,
points.
well, and it's not like everything works for everyone, like I've been doing my own like deep diving, and I've fallen into like medical medium stuff. I've fallen into like Andrew Huberman stuff. I've fallen into like other dudes on the internet stuff. Like there's all these doctors have prevailing wisdom about like, or that's not the right term, but now I'm using prevailing too much. But all of these doctors have these ideas of what's correct because they saw it work and there's studies done and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, okay, so this doctor says this about lectins, right? I don't know if anyone knows what lectins are, but they're inside of plants. And so there's a doctor that's literally like, you shouldn't eat these like most plants because they have lectins, and the lectins are basically like terrible for your GI tract because they are the plant's way of telling humans to fuck off, basically. So they're like this, they're kind of toxic to humans and they can affect your GI tract. Now, okay, like, and then there's other people who are like, yes, if you just do medical mediums, like plants all day, and there have been people in each like camp that have healed.
Yeah.
And so there is patterns that we can find, and then there's also things that work for some people that don't work for other people. And this is where it gets really, really, really fucking frustrating, especially if you're sick. And I don't even think I could go on like the Facebook group being sick, because I just have so many thoughts and feelings about all of it now, considering like I am, and it's not even sick. It's like some kind of like chronic underlying thing. It's not like I have a cold, and trying to heal, or like doing the work of healing, is far more complicated than just like following a well renowned pattern. It's like so individual, but simultaneously like you have to start somewhere. And I think a lot of times being able to at least start somewhere and cleaning up your diet a lot can do a lot of good. But now I don't know where the fuck I'm going. But yeah, it's just there's when we're so deeply saturated in not self, and our bodies have begun to deteriorate in ways because we're so deeply saturated in not self, getting out of it is going to be a journey that there's no one that has the map for. And you can't just blame certain things that are in fact health issues on being a projector. And this is something that I've said before. What a lot of people in the human design community are doing, you can come at me, I don't care, is they're not self, pretending like they are themselves, but basically just painting their not self with new eyeshadow and a new outfit, and saying now that they're themselves, but they haven't actually gone into the viscera of their bodies to do what's required to flip the script on that. And there's a lot of healing that's required. It's not just like, oh, okay, like I started following strategy and authority. Ross says that because it's really the only place that we can start. And it's so impossible to generalize the process, that I think he knew that what it requires is a level of introspection that most people don't have the capacity for, right? 4% of 4%. And so people are, they love the information, they're huge nerds, they get into it, but like actually changing the internal porosity, like allowing life to be breathed in and breathed out in a real way, instead of kind of functioning with this not self shell, is almost borderline impossible because we've been so homogenized. And I know I sound like a big Debbie Downer right now. I still think it's the most important work that we could possibly do, like each individual person. But I think that it's a far larger and more heroic task than anyone really recognizes, because it does come down to the cells. Like it does come down to the mitochondria. Like, we're not talking about it for nothing, okay? And it does come down to, genes, and also gene expression, and also like coming to terms with your conditioning, but then also the conditioning of the society and the culture that you're within, and understanding where your body is misfiring and thus giving you chaotic and disorganized information. And so you can't necessarily do what's correct via your authority until you clean that up, because you're getting information that's just not clear. It's chaos. And so yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I've started to do is like recognize how important like this step is, and how it can't be over. It can't be, we can't step over it. Now, of course, there's people who like were raised, generally speaking, in a way where they were able to keep some kind of like basic structure of their true identity, and there was just kind of other things that were going on that they're able to shed more easily. Like I think that just basically more people, some people have more or less stuff that needs to be shed in this process, and the more stuff you have to shed, the harder it is. But so that's just to say, for some people it will be an easier process, and the insights may come more readily or quicker. But at the same time, you know, for the people who are really, really, really in the weeds with their not self-conditioning, like this is a physical process first before it's a mental one.
Yeah. It's not easy.
I said what I said.
Um, I don't have anything to respond to your spiel, but I remembered other things and forgot other things. So it's a bit of backtracking. I remembered I
Nice.
wanted to talk about the spleen. I don't remember what I wanted to say about the spleen. So womp to that. But in terms of homogenized health, I feel like I'm just backtracking, but that's okay, I guess. I remembered something about the heart center, and like the heart center being associated with the heart as an organ, among other things, right? Like we have correlations between our body's physiology and human design. And as I've been studying endocrinology, I've been looking at how blood pressure occurs in the body and how it has nothing to do with the heart. It affects the heart, but the root cause of blood pressure is not the heart. It's everything else in the body. Like your cortisol level affects your blood pressure, your thyroid gland affects your blood pressure, your insulin affects, like everything affects your blood pressure. That's like not your heart as an organ beating. Your heart's a muscle. It receives its pulse to beat from the brain. And so it made me think about Ra, who died of a heart attack, and how like in human design we say like what you have defined, that's like where your health issues like if you have a defined throat, that's your thyroid, like just your thyroid. But like no, I feel like it's so much, it's not like the correlations somehow are wrong. Like you having a heart attack because of high blood pressure and high cholesterol and all these other things, guess what? Your thyroid gland helps control your cholesterol. Like most people think like eat less cholesterol, like that's not a word, but high cholesterol foods, and then you'll lower your cholesterol. Well, guess what? The thyroid hormone helps cholesterol reuptake. It's going to take cholesterol from your blood, the bad cholesterol, and put it in the liver and do something with it. And cholesterol is extremely necessary for hormones to be synthesized. And like there's all these bridges, all these synapses and
Mm-hmm.
connections in the body. And like we say things like, oh, you have a defined heart center, therefore you are susceptible to heart issues. But like, no. And again, I'm just harping on the same point that I had earlier, which is backtracking. But again, something I wanted to say about the spleen, I don't remember what the nuances were, but I think the major branch was I have a bone to pick. I feel like this episode's my bones to pick. I have bones to pick about like everything here now. Title, remember, hopefully we'll remember it. We always say this is what we're gonna call our episode, and we don't remember, and then we have to go back and listen. So at least I'm putting it out there for now. But a bone to pick with the spleen is I don't like the not self thematic of the spleen, of just like the catchphrase, like you're holding on to things that aren't good for you. I feel like it's so much more complex than that. And like here I am with my defined spleen, like who am I to say? Um, but like the G center, or like thinking of the solar plexus as comparisons, because I don't have those centers defined, and like so I'm familiar with the not self themes, looking for love and direction is, it's not just direction, and it's not just love, and it's not just identity. It is multifaceted, or like the avoiding confrontation and truth. Avoiding confrontation and avoiding truth and how they both work together. Like those are two separate things. Like it's multifaceted. There's different layers to it versus just holding on to things that aren't good for you with the spleen. I don't know. It's the center that deals with survival and feel good. And I feel like there's so many other labels living within the spleen that can be used for people to understand their not self tendencies within the spleen, and then just telling people you're holding on to things that aren't bad for you and just associating it as we do with like unhealthy relationships or toxic people like that. Just I don't know, I don't like it. I don't like it for whatever reason, and that's just me and my heresy. But yeah, because I feel like it has to do with more layers of health, but even then, I feel like the health lives everywhere. It doesn't just live in the spleen. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And I don't remember what else I wanted to say. I feel like I thought I came prepared with my ideas this episode, but I forgot everything. So Sarah was right when she called this out with lacking not substance, but groundwork or whatever it was you said at the beginning of the episode.
No, I mean, I'm just like, I didn't come prepared at all because I knew I was going to frustrate myself with trying to be, you know what I mean? I was like, it's not going to be a good idea. But I love this conversation. I love this conversation so much. I love it so much because, like, yeah, I mean, I have a bone to pick with the spleen too, in a sense. And after reading, I'm listening to audiobooking The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, which is what I was talking about with the telomeres. And then I'm also reading physical copy, a book about healing developmental trauma. And the thing that keeps coming out so obviously to me is that your mind and your physical body are like woven together, right? Like I think I shared this with you, Laura, in one of our audio messages. My body, because of the environment that I was raised in, not being supportive of me and my sensitivity, like has been essentially, it evolved to seek out the needs of the people that are around me. Like I have like a radar for it. It's almost like a sixth sense. And I have terrible interoception, which is basically me being able to sense what's going on internally when there are other people around me, because I have this strategy in my body, mind you, of seeking out external the needs externally of people around me, because I think that pleasing them, taking care of their needs equates, and I'm saying my body thinks this, it equates physically, my nervous system thinks this, to safety and to security and to not dying. And so it's quite literally like an imperative for me to do this. I don't have any mental control over it happening. And it certainly takes me away from being able to get in touch with my emotional authority, which is probably why like three parts of my profile are like three parts of my human design profile are like wait, like the 6, the 12, the 33. It's all just like, just step back. Like you have to step back. There's no way that you can do anything. But the bottom line is that like it's not that my body is separated from my mind, because my body my body is doing something, and then my mind is spinning a story about it. And so there's this real deep almost like preternatural, like beyond consciousness connection between the two of them and what's going on there. And this is probably also why the no choice thing, but it just, for me, it's like you can't chop this thing up the way that it's been chopped up. And I like really do feel, and this doesn't, by the way, mean that I don't think that human design is like incredibly useful, helpful, and like intriguing. It's just that taken as is like a huge kind of, I think, error in judgment by people. I think they really need to understand that Ra was painting with broad strokes because he had to. Like he had to do that. He only had his own perception. He only had so much time, and he only had his own experiences, and he had all this information that he needed to give to people. And so it's like, being reductionistic about the spleen like is necessary when you're trying to be mechanical about things, but there is so much going on that to be like that simplistic is almost a laugh to me. You can't simplify it like that. And people in the groups and stuff trying to like hard line certain things. I'm like, we don't know yet. Like this thing hasn't been around long enough. You know, it's like having a UFO in your backyard and like painting the exterior of it and thinking you know everything about it. Like we don't know. We haven't gotten really inside of it yet. And everybody, you know, we're in live and living color experimenting with what it means, but like there's nothing to be taken for granted and there's nothing to be taken wholesale. And you know, this is my gift as my 1-3-ness, but you know, again, it's not to say that I don't like, I love human design. I don't think I'm ever going to not love human design. There's so much value to it, but there's so much stuff that as people who are in this society who have been conditioned deeply, physically, mentally, in every possible way, like we have to work through to get to any like truth. So even, you know, even with the words being the way that they are, like as straightforward as they are, you know, everyone's like gets really like hyped up on the keynotes, like not wanting to change the keynotes and things like that. And it's like, well, maybe we're not at a consciousness place yet where we can even absorb them properly, you know? So anyway, that's just me ranting, but yeah, I fully am like in a new camp than I was 4 weeks ago. Although it's like a camp of one, you know, unless Laura wants to come hang out sometimes. Because I'm looking at this thing from like we started this conversation kind of like what the body as like a human organism, like a biological organism needs, and then like figuring that out, and then from there figuring out the science of differentiation, right? But like one is kind of like the base of the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Something you said is the body is not separated from the mind. And like I see that though with human design. Like to be a human with a human body graph, you have two crystals of consciousness. You are a body and a mind, and they have to work together to create you operating with consciousness. And a bone to pick I have with people in the human design community is how they try to separate the two of like, this is my design and this is my personality. My personality is identifies with this and my design identifies with that, or like having conscious versus unconscious channels. Like you as an entity are whole and it's the synthesis of all of it. Or like people who are like, my personality is a reflector. I'm like, no, your personality is not a reflector, because a reflector is an aura type which is synthesized from the whole. Like I'm not calling these people out, but like the nuance and the separation, like on the surface, it has to come out through the expression of the totality. And yes, the individual parts are beneficial to understand, but I don't know, bone to picks. Lots of bones
Lots
to
of
pick.
bones like in this like Gemini, Jupiter like
Yeah.
time frame. But you know, I think that like it's appropriate, Laura, for specifically for you and your 5-1 heresy, and then for me too with my 1-3-ness of like this is just the way that the cookie crumbles. Like we can't avoid getting to the bottoms of things, having bones to pick, and then externalizing things differently than the way that is like the prevailing belief system. And I don't have, again, like to get introduced to human design is such a gift. And it's not the fault of people who are externalizing the mechanics that Ra shared, that it may be too it may be too reductionist for the individual, because really truly like what for me is like the bottom line is that it comes down to you not being a puppet in order to get to the bottom of yourself. You know, like you have to be someone who is not just going to take everything wholesale because somebody said it without questioning the way that it feels in your body. And Ra would be the first one to tell you to do that, you know. But it's kind of like you have to ride, and I've made this analogy all the time. You have to ride with training wheels before you can take the training wheels off. And that's totally fine and understandable. It's just like, I'm not going to get trapped in the dogma of it all. Like, I just refuse to get trapped in the dogma of it. Like, I refuse to get trapped in the dogma of like male doctors or male anyone who's trying to say like they know the way like perfectly, like and also getting into fights within the community of people, because it's funny, I was looking online at like medical medium forums, and like their forums, Laura, reminded me of the human design forum. Because it's like, what are you fighting over? Like it was just like, I was like, oh, speechless, because I was seeing the folly in their own behavior of getting too into the weeds of like, well, maybe you just need to do this slightly differently. It's like, maybe you didn't put enough celery in your, or celery juice in the morning. If you have celery juice and this smoothie 4 times a week, like then you'll heal, you know, where people are like crying about fatigue and like not healing after following the protocols and all of this shit. And it's like, yeah, but like, how about you just listen? You do your best to shut off all of the outside noise and just do the work of figuring out what it means to listen to yourself, like really, without anybody else coming in, without needing to self-soothe from this, that, or the other thing. Like that for me is the only way towards what may feel like us getting to our own truth. And I say our own truth because I don't think we're going to get to some, like we may get to some kind of universalizable truth, but like there will be many universalizable truths. Well, we're going to find one of them if we're lucky. So yeah, it's been a real like just breath of fresh air for me to be off social media, because I left social media after. And Laura, I'm like, I can't wait to talk to you about what you found out about the adrenals. Like, thank God for the 916. I love this fucking energy, because I don't even have the energy to look into it, and it's my own body that's malfunctioning. And Laura's over here studying how all of the different like systems are like operating together. So I really appreciate that, and I'm excited that you were looking into it at all. But because of that, because being basically on a dopamine heavy diet of things that are not ultimately like that healthy for you, like it really fucks with your adrenals. And so I'm cutting it all out. Like I haven't had caffeine. I'm off social media. I'm still posting here or there on TikTok, but trying to limit my amount of screen time, generally speaking. Just reading, basically trying to treat my body like a little baby angel, you know, because I'm trying to, again, get quiet so I can actually hear what's going on instead of just being completely mental about the whole thing. And I love what you said too about like people thinking that they can separate their mind and their body. And like, here's the thing that I figured with the mind and the body. The thing that I loved about learning about the design chart, the body chart, is that there was this aspect of me that was unconscious to me that I now had conscious access to. Not fully, but like in a conceptual way, I had access to it, which was really cool. But like the two things are so married, like they're so interwoven with each other that the dysfunction of one is going to cause the dysfunction of the other. Like we can't, the things happen simultaneously. Like the way that your body feels is going to have an effect on the way that your mind thinks, and on and on and on and on. And like you are a product of these two things working in like some kind of cohesion, and there's no way out of that. Like you cannot separate it, which is why I feel like looking at your astrology chart on its own is like such a like I've gone to the point where I'm like, I need to go back and do readings for everyone that I gave astrology readings to, because I feel like I did a disservice to them by not like recognizing that there's this other aspect of self that I didn't acknowledge. But yeah, I mean, I love what you said there about just it being something that's like silly to think that people are like, oh, this is one thing, this is the other. It's like, nope, they're all holding hands. They're all informing different aspects of you. It's all connected in a web, and in this like really, really complex web. To think that we can just like pull it apart like that easily is it's especially with all of the dysfunction that the not self world creates. No, it's not that easy.
Not to burst your bubble. Well, not that you have a bubble to burst, but my phone decided to cut out for like a few seconds. Well, not a few, like more than 15, 30 seconds. I don't know how long it was. So I didn't miss all of what you said. It was towards the end there. I caught the tail end of what you said, but technical difficulties, yay. Um,
All
but I
good.
think you were you were synthesizing things that were said and putting pieces together for the most part,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, and I was just saying that I really liked what you said about the fact that, this mind and body thing, like the design and the personality, like they are one thing. There's no way to pull the pieces apart at this point. It's not possible.
Yeah. But it's funny because it's like what spirituality tries to get us to do, to separate mind and body. Like, oh, be embodied, be in your body, and like don't listen to your mind, especially with meditation techniques. But that came out of nowhere just now. Um, I have other things on my list of things to
Nice.
talk about.
Go for it.
Unrelated to health now, so we're moving away from the health theme. But in
Moving
my
on.
time of being busy, I got to interact with a different penta. And this is just like a random little thought that I realized of like you can have generators together and they might not necessarily form a working penta. You can have generators with the 59.6, with 57 or 50.27, or with like the root to sacral energy. And you can have a bunch of generators and pop them together, and that doesn't necessarily mean that when they're together they're going to have pentachannels or a defined G or a defined sacral center or throat. And so I was just thinking about the wildness of that, of how when you're with people, the structure of that organism to be able to be productive or, have direction or know what it's doing or be able to express itself well being in a group. It's a synthesis of the different pentachannels and not the human design people. So I was with several people or two other people, and um, I know one of their body graphs, and I think with that person, there's no penta energy between me and him. And I don't know the other person, but I'm guessing, like, based on how we operated as a group, we were not a functioning penta because I was just thinking about the G center within a penta. If you have an undefined G in a penta, that means there's also no throat and no sacral because it's in between. If you have you need the G defined within a penta for it to have any channel because all the channels connect to the G. And so if you have a directionless penta, like you're put together in a group and you can't figure out what you're doing or where you're going, which is like what it felt like for me to be with those people, you don't have a penta. Like you have a penta, but that penta like ain't got nothing to it. It's a pretty poopy penta. And I think that's the energy I was in for the majority of my time during this hiatus. But regardless of that, that was just like a whoa. It doesn't matter if you have generators, like that doesn't necessarily mean that the penta works. That was just like mind blown thought right there. But I got to witness what I believe, again, I don't know this other person's body graph, but I'm pretty darn sure that she has a defined solar plexus. I got to witness a relationship between two solar plexuses. And that, like in human design, we say like goes with like, even though the genetic imperative says opposites attract, in human design, likeness works with likeness, whether it's transpersonal profiles or personal destiny profiles or definition within centers, like works with like. And being a non-solar plexus person, like my experience with solar plexus energy is that I amplify it and I blow things out of proportion and it doesn't feel good. And it disgrounds me. That's not a word. It ungrounds me. It makes me feel ungrounded. It just makes me feel unstable. Whereas I feel like witnessing two defined solar plexus people, they can be expressing the highs and lows of their wave, and they're not going to disrupt the other person within the other person's wave. They have this stability, unique individual stability in each of them, that when the other person's up or down, that person can hold space for that person's highs and lows. And it made me think of, what they say for solar plexus definition people, like you need to be in a relationship with someone who can hold you, or not hold you, but like who can be with you, who it's correct to be with at your highs and at your lows. It's not just your highs that are good for them, because like if they're gonna distort your lows, say if they're undefined, they're gonna distort your lows, like that will it doesn't work, because they're not gonna like it, and they're gonna avoid you at your lows. They're not gonna be able to be there to be supportive and hold space for you at your lows. And so it's just really interesting to watch different solar plexus dynamics work in person, like in the moment, which I believe, I mean, I could be wrong because I don't know the other person's body graph, but it was interesting to watch that person have highs or lows, and to see space being held and compassion being held, and just like they're not exploding, because I would explode if I was part of the relationship. I would be having a heyday. Like I would not be okay. Um, so it was really interesting to be a bystander and to witness that, and to then see what I think is empirical evidence of like does work with like in that sense. Um, so that's just another little tidbit from our time away. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, of course I do. But no, I mean, it's first to say, that's where your wisdom's going to be. So like, it's not to say that you can't ever be that way, because I do know some open solar plexus who are good at it. But like what you're saying definitely rings true on like a kind of 30-year-old peer level. Like people around me and the people that I'm friends with, it's like very obvious to me that it's just, I feel less like a burden to people who are defined emotionally, because they have their own kind of emotional shit going on. So it's not like I'm affecting them so viscerally, I'm just not affecting them as much. So like they're not as perturbed by it when I am going through these different phases of my own wave. So I definitely, yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and it's true. And it's, I was thinking about this like with the genetic imperative versus the like the individuation, and kind of the need to like pair with someone who understands us and sees us and we can have communion with on like the personality level, like how those things are not always going to be different, right? Like sometimes we'll find someone where there's the genetic imperative but we also can commune with. And I mean, I haven't had that experience yet, so I'm just saying, like, I feel like it's possible. It's possible. And that, despite how strong the genes are, like your father who refuses to make decisions on a high or a low for the stocks, like there are going to be people who have experienced enough that they know not to make decisions in relationships based on feeling high or low for a moment. And likely that does come from experience. Maybe it comes with their own, kind of inborn ability to not make choices that are incorrect for them. I don't know, but there's always going to be instances where we are not just running off of our conditioning, or maybe it's luck, but we're able to, it not just be about the genetics. And again, not something that I've experienced yet, because I've been in not self, and my life has been like basically entirely about my impulsive genetic behavior. But like I do think that first of all, that just made me like all warm and fuzzy on the inside to just hear that like the two emotional people together are just, it's,
They've been
it's good.
together, well, like sort of on and off. So the one I know, the body graph, he's a 3-5, but they've been together for like 20 years, I think. A long time, very long time. And they only now just got married. It's like kudos to them for really, really, really waiting out the emotional wait before committing fully to one another. Like that is like, there you go, emotional authority in live and living color.
And they're probably like, yeah, I guess we're not going anywhere. Like, I guess like this is what it seems like, because the uncertainty can definitely be a bitch. And it's funny because the two emotional people that I know that are in a relationship too, they've been together for over 10 years now, and they're not married. Like they just like it's not necessarily something that they feel that they need to do, you know what I mean? But yeah, I like that observation. Of course I'm biased because I am emotional, but yeah, I believe ultimately that, and maybe like truly like it will be that someone like you with an open emotional center fares best on like a longevity perspective with someone who has an undefined solar plexus, but like on a friendship or like therapist or like counselor or coach level, I think that an undefined person that, you know, who's working with an emotional person can give them like great insights, you know what I mean? Or like hold space for them in a way, understand their emotionality in a way that makes it feel more human to them, because of having to deal with it for so long. The undefinedness and just the amplification. I mean, just like I was saying to Laura the other day that, you know, I'm starting to tap into what feels like I'm getting closer to like the wisdom of my completely open centers. And my open centers. So I have 3 that are completely open, 2 that are just that have 2 hanging gates. But um, you know, the thing that I think I'm getting the most intelligent about is what it is to be like, what identity is in general. And I don't have one, you know, I don't have one to compare it to. And maybe it's more comfortable for two people who have an identity to be together, like on a romantical or like long-term level. But I think that I can be more wise than they could maybe potentially about what it is to have an identity in the first place. Um, so yeah, I mean, not really. Again, I don't know if I have anything else to touch on with what you just said, but all really good and interesting observations.
There's one sort of last thing. Well, two things. I don't know. How are you feeling with time wise? I know
I'm good for now.
you
I
have
have until 5:30.
okay. Something that just like I've been personally experiencing recently is the woes of wanting to be heard and not being heard. And I don't know if it was like 1222 was defined for some time, if it was like my own 12 or just being a projector, but it's just like I want to say thanks to people and they're not listening or interrupting me or ignoring me. And it just makes me feel really sad. Wow, that was a Valley Girl accent, but better than I don't know what's worse, the country accent that I sometimes have or the Valley Girl accent that I sometimes have. Oh boy. But it's like I get teary-eyed just talking and thinking about it now of just like the sadness of having a defined throat as a projector and like wanting to be heard for the things that I think are valuable within me to say and it not being heard by other people. Because I'm not being invited to share these things or like I do, but it gets ignored. Like I was talking to a family member about something and their phone like maybe this is just like their personality and not necessarily anything to do with me, but their phone rings and then they prior like I feel like this is common in relationships, but then the person prioritizes the dopamine hit of like whatever is the alert on the phone if their phone rings while we're in conversation, and then they ignore your train of thought as you're saying it and look at their phone. I feel like that I'm not in a have not been in a relationship, so I don't experience that in terms of romance that I feel like is common or like people tend to respect and value people who turn their phone off when they're interacting with one another. Because it's really sad when you're like trying and you're in the middle of a story and then all of a sudden the person just like has no cares for whatever it is that you're saying or being in a group and trying to speak up and like not being heard. Like the whole projector issue of just like you have something to say and then they're ignoring you and then they say the same thing you said 2 seconds later and like that person who said it 2 seconds later gets all the credit even though you said it first and no one heard it, but it like went into the subconscious minds of the group. Just like that stuff has been happening and it's just very disheartening um to experience, which is just like, shut up. The answer is wait to be invited to talk as a projector, but then you just hold on to all these things and then they never come out because there's no one there to, oh gosh, I'm getting really, really emotional, but like there's no one there to pull it out of you. And it just makes me sad. I'm gonna stop because if I keep going, I'll just start crying more and more. Oh boy. High-pitched voice.
It is. I mean, just to say, it is emotional. Like, if you're a projector and you're listening to this, it's a very it's a very normal experience to have. And there's two different things that I want to say. The first one, and I'll send you this video, but there's this video about the universal rejection principle, which basically says that like it's never up to you when it's time for somebody to hear you or to want you or to want to date you or want to be with you. Like you could want to be with somebody and like they're not ready, and so like that moment you want to be with them, but they're not going to be ready for you for like 3 years, and that's not your choice. Like you have no control over it. So on the one hand, like there's this quality of just like understanding that like, really truly we have no control. But then simultaneously, I want to read a quote that I actually just wrote down from I'll read this later, but simultaneously, like there needs to be ways that we're able to express ourselves. My aunt is taking a class, the ABCs class, which is like part of the IHDS certification track. And she said that like for projectors, it's fine to put yourself out there, right? As long as you're not like going after someone in particular, it's like being able to like have something to offer of yourself so that people know what it is that you are. In order to like be able to be seen, and like because I think that being seen and being recognized is not just something that we do and that is part of it. It's like it's a need. It's like a human physiobiological need, maybe specific to people who have projected channels, right? But it's like it's basically like akin to not drinking water, to not being able, like if like that's the level of like need that it is. And so despite the fact that like I've always fallen more onto the side of being someone who's initiating when I should not, I'm also someone who like I have a lot to say and I can't hold it all in because it'll fucking kill me. And so I've created all of these channels to be able to speak in, right? This podcast is one of them. The podcast that I do with Kristen and Stephanie, which is more like business related stuff, is one of them. I have my own channel on TikTok now because of this like inherent inborn need. And it's not like my podcasts are doing amazingly well, but I feel like I'm preparing in a way for my throat, my defined throat to like, it's like honing. It's like I'm like honing, I'm like sharpening the sword of this thing that I have so that it doesn't go stagnant, so that it doesn't go stale, like, and kind of popularity be damned, because I believe in myself to such a level that I know that eventually I will get the energy cleaned up, my aura cleared out, like all of the stuff, the condition, not self nonsense cleared up, that like my voice will be ready to be used. And I've been getting, I took a break from TikTok for a little while, but then when I came back to TikTok, it was like I was getting more and more traction with the things that I was saying. Like after I had cut myself off from other social media, after I had started reading, after I had limited my screen time, after I cut out caffeine, it was like I was becoming my aura was like becoming more potent, and the things that I was saying was like reaching more people. And so this is just to say, and this is just because I'm also like a big Lora fan. So I'm like waiting for Lora to just like, fucking break the barrier, even if it leads to some level of bitterness, because she has so much insight into things that like nobody fucking thinks about, and like they need to. There's like a multitude of things that I could say that you should be sharing about them, like whether it's on TikTok or elsewhere. And in this podcast, to like your credit and to mine, is like a place where we are able to sharpen the sword of our sharing, so that when it is time, like when the energy is correct and the timing is right, when it's like that, when it, because like I said, it may not be the time for whomever it is to be hearing whatever you have to say, but maybe it will be time in 3 years. And when you do say it in that time frame down the line, you'll say it in a sharper way, in a way that's more penetrating, in a way that's heard, in a way that's creates impact, not in a manifestor way, but like in the successful projector way. So, I understand this is no pressure, because you're only going to do what you do when it's time for you to do it. But I do, like, I look at everything that I'm doing as it concerns my own talents and skills that are yet to be fully developed, as like, I can't let this like thing die on the vine. I have to put it somewhere for the time being until I really understand what the whole process is about. Very abstract of me, but like Laura's abstract too. And you don't know what the whole process is about yet. You don't know what all this time alone has been about. You don't know what any of it is about yet, because we're not at the end of it yet. So it's kind of like, surrendering to the rejection principle on one hand. And then the other thing I just want to say, as tangentially, and this also relates to what you said about people like being more interested in dopamine than they are in, actually like having real like contact with the people that are around them, is that we're in a very complicated system. Like, we're in a very conditioned and complex system right now in our culture. And in the Myth of Normal, Gabor Mate talks about how the capitalistic structures, specifically the ones that are related to the production of our food, are basically undermining our free will. And I'm just going to read this really quick, and then I'm going to speak on it in a second. Neuromarketing is a strategic invasion of human consciousness, consciously aimed at the hyperactivation and constant agitation of the dopamine and endorphin functions of the brain. This endeavor was abundantly cataloged in Michael Moss's 2013 work of investigative journalism on the food industry, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. One of the most widely read books of the year, he too documented a deliberate corporate conspiracy to hook people on addictive junk foods with no regard for health consequences. Painstaking work combining the expertise of science and marketing wizards to find the bliss spot, that perfect blend of sugar, salt, and fat that would most excite the brain's pleasure centers, or as the case may be, other addictive substances such as caffeine, for example, the dopamine-boosting drink Red Bull, which, if advertisers were honest, would add a qualifier, billing itself as a non-renewable energy drink. This mind hacking, in today's parlance, to induce mass addictions directly undermines free will, and I mean that neurochemically. By design, the power of the prefrontal cortex is dampened, and the capacity of the lower emotional circuits to subvert rational thought ratcheted up. It's an appalling example of how rampant free enterprise materialism has hijacked the science of neurophysiology to deregulate the brain, just as it deregulates financial markets. To call such activities a conspiracy is no hyperbole, even if the word has lost some of its meaning due to overuse. So I know that doesn't seem to be related to what Laura was just getting teared up about, but people are not able to actively participate in their own free will, whatever that may be. Now, of course, we don't, we understand what no choice is, like on a certain level. Like, there is no choice in the fact that people are choosing the dopaminergic urges over all of the other more fulfilling urges, right? The things that actually lead to happiness, not just like an addiction, but like everything is an addiction and everyone is caught up in it, which is why I find it to be such an important time for projectors to be speaking about what's going on, so we can bitch slap people out of the fact that they're just completely hypnotized and unconscious because of whatever they're eating, whatever they're consuming, the things that they're watching, like the entertainment industry as a whole, all of the consumerism, everything. Like there needs to be things that shift that. But until they do, and until we like, I guess, like take our roles wherever they are, when sloppily, because we're not going to do it perfectly, might I add, this shit is just going to keep on. This crazy train is just going to keep on kind of running. And again, like, do we have any choice? Like, that's the question. It's like, well, we better act like we do. And that's my thing. It's like, I don't think that we have choice, but I do think that we should act like we do, which is a funny place to be. But Laura, do you want to comment on anything?
No, wise words. For some of it, for the helping me process. And yeah, it's just like it's easy to forget that everyone else is not self, so it's not like they're acting from a place of genuinity and genuinity. being genuine.
Genuineness.
Yeah, whatever it is. So, like, there's no need to get super butthurt apart from the fact that like it still hurts. Um, but yeah, it's just the woes, the woes of life. But yeah, interesting about like the mindlessness, the slave culture that we have that we're constantly subject to with the quote, like you said, not just food, but every culture, everything around us is addictive, and we are mindless as a consequence of it. So yeah, it's interesting. But other than that, no, not really. I'm feeling sniffly now and nasally and congested from my
That's
tears. So
okay. Well, and I mean, it's just also just what you were talking about. I don't know if we said it on the podcast, but with the kind of like, just mind-numbingly, soulless conditions of like travel culture and like different places that like we go to travel like in mass, and seeing how like there's just like everything that is soulful about them has been uprooted in favor of like this mass consumeristic and materialistic kind of behavior. um but yeah, I mean, this is, again, it's been 4 weeks, and like this is where my brain is at right now, everybody. So like a lot has happened in a short amount of time. Um and yeah, I mean, I guess my thing is, my thing always is like, I want to empower. There's no individual circuitry active right now. Maybe there's some active in my chart. Oh, there is 1222. Duh. No wonder why I'm acting like this. No wonder why I'm acting like this. I want to empower people to like actually, want to live their lives, and like their real lives, not their fake lives, their conditioned lives. Um and what I'm realizing is that like coming at it directly from the human design perspective doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to first show people where they're limiting themselves, and where they're being basically dragged around by their toenails by something that they don't even really recognize or are conscious of. So it's the planets, it's like the program is grabbing you, and you're just, that's it, there's nothing else to it. But I do, I feel you, and I feel the situation, and I know the deep burning feeling internally of just not having a like a real sense of feeling like recognized on a regular basis. So this is part of the process, I think, of like feeling the fear or feeling the discomfort or feeling the depression of it, so that like things start to shift just by nature of allowing yourself to feel it.
true. We shall see.
We shall. Okay, well, you don't have anything else?
Well, I did have something else, but now that I'm emotionally charged, I don't want to share it because, like, what if I start crying again? It was going to be a funny story, but it was about
Are you
like
gonna start
it was
you're
about
gonna
me
start
being bullied in high school, and like I'm not emotional about it, but now that I'm emotionally charged, I feel like I will be emotional about it if I share it. So I won't share it. I'll wait until next time.
Okay, that's fair. Understood. Are you're getting defined emotionally too because of the
Yeah,
22?
it's just this moment. Well, 1222 is the channel of openness. It's about wanting to share your individual mutation to the other. It's where the individual circuit meets the other circuits, where it becomes not just about the self, but about the other, or it becomes transpersonal to a certain extent. So it makes sense, like in sharing my individual experience and how it mutated me, and expressing it, and it being an emotional thing to express it. So yeah, it is itself.
Yeah. The 1222 is 1222ing, that's for sure. And it's a spike. It's a spike and it's a drop. So that's a new kind of feeling. There's a lot of things that have happened over the course of the past few weeks, but like I just feel like we've probably given everyone a lot to process. And so I'm happy with closing it there. So, yes, thank you guys for joining us. It has been a long while. We're excited to be back in business, hopefully. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Business-ish. We'll see how it goes. And as per usual, we're still on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook at Projector Stories. You can find us on YouTube at the Projector Stories Podcast. And yeah, drop us a line if there's anything that you want to connect about. Lora?
Thank you for listening to me cry, everyone. Catch you on the flip side.
Bye.
Oh no, sorry, this was gonna be a long, awkward goodbye because my phone was closed. Okay, long, awkward. When Sarah and I talk, with our sacralness, we don't know when enough is enough, and so we say long, awkward goodbyes to one another sometimes. So you're getting a little taste of that. This is, as we like to call it, a projector goodbye. Okay, now that I have my
Bye.
app open, I can press the end button. Bye, everyone.